Hello, book friends. Terry from Terry Talks Books, or Ms. Terry B, here on YouTube. I have a book review for you today, but before I get going, I am going to just mention a few things. The first one is, did you notice that I've made a couple of posts here on YouTube? Not videos, but posts. I have noticed them there, but never occurred to me to actually use them. So I've put 2 posts up. It's a fabulous place to leave little messages if you're going to be late with a video, or just you want to ask questions, poll your subscribers for their opinion on something, things like that. So anyway, I put 2 up, and one of them discusses a few changes I made here on the channel. I didn't want people to be confused. I am, as most of you probably know by now, because I've mentioned it a few times, that I have been working since the beginning of the year to kind of figure out what it is I'm doing here. I've tried some different things, and I'm resorting my playlists and just trying to get things a little bit more streamlined. I also realized, I know these things because this is something I did for professionally, but I realized that my branding is off, and that's partly because I've been on YouTube since 2009, and I didn't do Terry Talks Books. That didn't even exist at the time. But on Instagram, I go by Terry Talks Books. And you may have noticed, if you've looked at my YouTube homepage, the banner on that says Terry Talks Books. So recently, YouTube has let us change our username and change the channel name and things like that. I don't know how long you've been able to change these things. A little while, but I never did anything with that. And so I went in just a couple of days ago, and trying to make things a little easier to find and a little more consistently branded, I did officially change the title name of my channel to Terry Talks Books. So 3 separate words. And on Instagram, I'm still at Terry Talks Books, and it's called Terry Talks Books. But here on YouTube, my username is remaining at Ms. Terry B, for now, at least. I didn't want to completely confuse people, make my channel unfindable, things like that. So I left that alone for now. And when I went looking for at Ms. Terry B or Terry Talks Books, I was more easily getting my channel to pop up. So I think that that's a positive, but you can let me know your thoughts down below in the comments if you so choose to do that. I'm always interested in what my subscribers think about what I'm doing over here. And I am also thinking about making 2 videos. One would be a channel update addressing some of these things, plus what am I doing with my playlist, what am I doing with my videos and things like that. I'm also thinking of making a new introduce myself video. I know I did one back in, I think, 2009, and things have changed. My purpose for being here has changed. And so I thought, it might be a good idea to go ahead and do that. I've got new subscribers since then, quite a few. And, let's see, what else? I think that's it. So I'm thinking of doing both of those. So yeah, I'm not new here, so I'm not going to do a newbie tag or anything like that. But, I reintroduce myself and talk about some of these changes. So anyway, thought I'd update you very quickly before I start on my book review. So what am I doing today? I'm going to be talking about Black Swans by Eve Babbitt, and you'll see on the cover here the subtitle, Stories. I'm going to come back to that. But Black Swans Stories by Eve Babbitt was published in 1993. This edition, this copy I have here, is published by Counterpoint, located in Berkeley, California. Surprise, surprise. I'm not. And the intro in this is by Stephanie Danler, and that has a copyright of 2018. So Eve Babbitt's kind of had, there was kind of a renewed interest in her books fairly recently. You know, I might go back to like 2012 or something like that, but fairly recently there's been more interest in her writing, and her books had become more readily available. They'd kind of disappeared for a long time. So anyway, I gave this one here, I think 4 stars in Goodreads, and I read it in August. For any of those tracking with any of that, I thought I'd document that here. But I pointed out stories, right? And I point that out in conjunction with the genre. And I'm not even sure that what I'm going to say is a genre. I've kind of lost track of what's a genre. For instance, people say that YA is a genre now, and I've always thought of it, as a librarian, I always thought of it as a, you know, it was an age designation of you know, what is the expected audience for this? Who is it written to? As opposed to it being a genre. So you would have mysteries that were for young adults. You would have maybe fantasy for young adults. Now young adults seems to just have become, officially or not, a genre. People think of it as a genre. So maybe it is considered a genre now. Maybe it truly is. But when you hear me talk about YA, just FYI, I don't consider it a genre myself, but I do recognize that others do. So my question is autofiction a genre? Because this is what I would consider autofiction. So autobiographical fiction. So a lot of truth and things pulled from the author's life, things that didn't really happen, kind of a thing. I've written things similar to this, and people go, "Oh, did that really happen to you?" And anybody who's written like that, you know, it's like, well, it's not strictly autobiographical. It's a story. I'm telling a story, but there's a lot of truth in the story. I've drawn from some things I know, and maybe I'll talk about that as a separate video someday and give you a couple of examples from my own writing. I think I've worried some people with my writings. The few people that have had the opportunity to read some of my vignettes and personal essays is kind of a, wow, should we worry about you, Terry? It's like, no, I took a truth and then I fictionalized. So I consider this, whether it's a genre or not, I consider this autofiction, maybe a bit of memoir, but fictionalized. I think fictionalized memoir. So those of you who, hopefully somebody understood all that mess I just threw at you, but I think, you know, that the stories in here, they're interlinked, and they read very much like personal essays, and the point of view and the person and point of view here, to me, is very obviously Eve Babbitt's herself. So that's why I call it autofiction, even though it's considered fiction, and it says stories. So do with that what you want, and if you have you want to talk about this concept, this idea, you know, leave me comments below. I'm very interested in having conversations about that, and getting into that a little bit. So genre, autofiction, that's what I would call it. And the setting is Los Angeles, 1980s and early 1990s. And I have probably done, it might have been a mini review. Did I do a separate review? I don't know. But I read Eve's Hollywood, and that's very clearly capturing the 1960s and early 70s. And then Slow Days, Fast Company, I can't remember, but I think that one is at least early 70s as well. And then Black Swans here, 1980s, 1990s, early 1990s. So that is the setting. And the major themes of these interlinked stories, or the personal essays, however you want to look at these, is writing and becoming a writer. She really does talk about that a lot in here, and also relationships. The different, I think there's about a 20-year age difference between the Eve Babbitts of the Eve's Hollywood and the Eve Babbitts of Black Swans. I'm guessing their character, I mean, who does, like I said, it's, to me, it's obviously Eve herself, and the character of Eve is probably around 40 or so, and she's looking back herself, and and acknowledging the changes that happen between maybe your early 20s and when you're in your early 40s, and what's important to you, and how you're living your life. So we have relationships, and also there is some real commentary, I think, which is one of the reasons I like to read these, on the 60s and 70s LA. And in this case, it's looking back on how LA of the 80s and 90s came out of what she previously depicted in the 60s and 70s. So there's quite a bit of commentary on that. The tone of the book is very lighthearted, very sparkly, very vivacious and cheerful, a certain recklessness. I would say it's also very vibey. It's part of the reason I like it. It has a vibe. And her outlook, her way of presenting LA, like I said, is kind of positive, even when she's acknowledging some of the negatives, which is interesting, I find. And very often, Eve Babbitts and Joan Didion, who were contemporary LA, not contemporary, they were, what's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, they were writing around the same time. They were about the same age. Words, sometimes they just fly away. Anyway, Didion has much different tone. Sometimes she's very much holds herself removed. It's a lot colder in some ways, and it is a lot more descriptive. It's a lot more journalistic, I guess, maybe. And she just lets it all hang out. She does not romanticize. And I don't know if you'd say that Eve Babbitts romanticizes it, but I think the reader could easily romanticize this mess, by reading her, because it is so vivacious and sparkly and very amoral or immoral. That could be a conversation. But anyway, that's the tone here. And I did want to mention Didion and how different the tone is from Didion. So a lot of people who've read Eve Babbitts has probably already also read Didion. So it might be an interesting talking point for us here. So what else did I say? She does, one of the things I like her about Babbitts is she really does present, especially in this book, a cutting observation of LA, while still being quite generous about it. She's 20 years later, more or less, there's a lot more of a satire. There's a lot more, just like I mentioned, just cutting observation of it, but it's done in a rather positive way, and she's very generous with it. Now, I mentioned before, I lived over there. I lived over there for decades, and I'm just not so generous about this, and very familiar, especially with the 1980s, 90s, and forward LA, and have been watching things change. I could see when I arrived at the end of the 1970s in that area, I could still see the things that LA was, and the way it was depicted by Babbitts in her earlier writing. I could still see that, but it was already fading. It was already changing, and was becoming a lot more of what she was presenting here in this particular book. So, but yet here's the thing: I'm not so generous, and but it still pulls. She still pulls from me a certain admiration and sense of nostalgia for a place that I just, honestly, I couldn't get away from it fast enough once I had the opportunity. I'd wanted to leave for a long time, and just things, and that just wasn't happening. And so when I had the opportunity more recently and left, I just really, honestly, I couldn't leave fast enough. Yet, when I read, when I read this, there is still some admiration and some nostalgia, and I'm not even sure what to think about that. I'm not even sure what to think about myself in that respect. To me, it's one of those weird, right? Kind of situations. So maybe it just speaks to the skill of Babbitts here. So anyway, let's see. So she's very insightful into the times and the place. And of course, that's a major reason why I read her, and why I read Didion is I'm trying to piece some things together from my younger years. And they're just enough older than me that I can see what my generation was coming from, what how we ended up where we were, and then where it continued to go after that. So I find it very, very interesting to do that, and to gain some of this insight from just reading accounts of this from people who actually lived it. So I thought one of the things that came to me while I was reading these, I will call them interlinked essays, was F. Scott Fitzgerald. And just, he wrote about fashionable excesses, and Babbitts really did the same thing so far in my reading of her. And so it was kind of an interesting thing that just kind of popped into my head. I thought, oh wow, I see some similarity there, different time periods, but yeah. And then the satirization of LA. It was really, in my knowing of it, and maybe really still is, it's a place for the young. And it's been called La La Land, and there's a reason for that. But she wrote in here, she says she describes it, she satirizes it, but she's describing it eternally youthful, sunny and carefree. And here's a quote: a beauty without a whisper of fading, sagging, or wrinkling. And so she's addressing kind of it seems positive, but she's doing that tongue in cheek, because then she goes on to say, but age is a disaster. And so the best way I have of kind of interpreting what she's saying there is really that it is for the young, and you get past a certain age and you no longer fit into that, and it becomes something different. And so yeah, I think there was some definite tongue-in-cheek there. So her character in here, the character Eve, pretty much is, like I say, probably around 40 now, and she pretty much embraces sobriety and moderation. So she's still out and about and doing things, but she lives a much more moderate life than the Eve of Eve's Hollywood. let me tell you, that was kind of crazy. So interesting watching somebody mature somewhat, I think. And if you know anything about what happens to Eve, what happened to her as she, even later in life, it shows the reality of many things, I think. And if she'd lived even longer than, if she'd lived longer than she did, you know, I kind of wonder if she'd still have that brightness, that vivaciousness, you know, if it'd still be sparkly or if it would just be really grim. So anyway, thoughts I've had, and I hope to get some enlightenment from this before the end of the year. I really do want to read the Didion Babbitt's biography that came out. I'm pretty sure it was last year, probably around November or something like that. I was hoping to read it right after I got it and then set it aside. And but I'm hoping to read that and get some insight there on both authors, since I've been reading both of them as a personal project and kind of sorting some things out. So very, very interested in that. And maybe there'll be a future video just discussing this. I do know that I do want to do a separate video talking about all of the Eve Babbitt's books and maybe even suggesting an order in which to read them, because I think that that could be very helpful to read them in a certain order. So, but this book here, let me finish up with Black Swans. There's a few more things I want to say, but there's how many? There's an introduction, but then there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, 9 separate essays or chapters. I did put little asterisks, can't say it, next to Self-Enchanted City. So apparently that was one of them. If you've read this, then you can go take a look at that. Self-Enchanted City I particularly liked, and Tangoland. I really enjoyed a lot of what she was talking about in both of those. And so you can take a screenshot here if you want. Don't know how visible all of that was, but that's the contents on this. But I quite enjoyed it. Like I said, gave it 4 stars. Might not be for everybody. I have a particular reason for wanting to read it. It is very readable. It flows. It's very readable. And I wanted to finish a little bit just talking about the title. Now I want to look into the title more. I hope I get back to it. Sometimes I say these things and I move on and never come back to it. But Black Swans, I thought that sounds like it means something. And then there is, if you noticed it at the end, the last chapter, I think, was titled Black Swans, correct? Yeah, right there at the bottom. Last one, Black Swans. And so I thought, you know, that is an intriguing title. And what are we talking about? What is a black swan? What is that? And I looked it up very briefly. Black swans equal major world events. They're unforeseen events with 3 characteristics. 1, outliers. 2, they are impactful. So they're outliers and they are impactful. And 3, retrospectively rationalized as predictable. So, so at the beginning, maybe not so much, but then, you know, things can be rationalized later on as, well, that was predictable. So I thought that was interesting. I'd like to learn more about that. And then last thing I wrote down, Black Swans is a shift from Eve's Hollywood, LA Woman, and Sex and Rage, which are quite Bacallian in their nature. And I thought that the whole tone, it's still vivacious, it's still sparkling, but it is not as Bacallian. So maybe age showing through. It gets hard to maintain that level of party girlness, you know, the older you get. So I really did enjoy this, and I'd like to know from you all. I've asked about some different things as I've gone along here. And go ahead and comment to me on any of those that I already mentioned. But also, you know, have you read Black Swans? Have you read any of Eve Babbitt's other works? What about Joan Didion? Have you read Joan Didion? And if you have read both of them, Babbitt's and Didion, do you have a preference? And if so, why. I'm interested. I think I have a preference, kind of. They do different things for me, so I need to think through that. But do you have a preference yourself? And what was the other thing I wanted to bring up? Oh, have you read the biography, the Didion Babbitt's biography that came out pretty sure it was last year. Sorry, I don't have the actual title and author, but you should be able to find it. Let me know. Let's chat below in the comments. And I will also put below in the comments a link to a review, an essay review on black swans that I have read part of. I'm partway through it and want to finish it, but I thought it's very good, and I will link this below, but it's on the Los Angeles Review of Books, so lareviewofbooks.org. So Los Angeles Review of Books, and the title of the review essay is Eve Babbitt's Expensive Regrets by Lauren Sarazin, and it's from 2018. So like I said, I will capture that at least in the description box below and leave a link, and then I'll remember to put a card up there with a link in it to this as well. So anyway, let's chat. You know, I like to have chats with people in the comments, and look for my posts on YouTube. Visit me over on Terry Talks Books on Instagram if you prefer that format. And you can get previews of what I'm doing over there. I post pictures and talk about things sometimes. At least advertise for the video reviews, since I haven't really been writing reviews, haven't done that in a while. But anyway, it was good to sit with y'all and talk about Black Swans and Eve Babbitt's a little bit. And I will see you again soon, BookTube. Bye-bye.